What is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome to the Week 12 Waiver Wire Show, where today we're going to be covering everything that you need to know to start off Week 12 of fantasy football. Now, to no one's surprise, once again, we had another week of nonsense in the NFL. Why would I say such a thing? Sean Tucker was the RB1 overall on the week. Jacoby Brissett, he set an all-time NFL record with 47 pass completions in one game without his number one wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. How about the other Cardinals wide receiver Michael Wilson? He came into week 11 with 231 yards total through 9 games, then had 185 yards alone in just week 11. There were only 17 wide receivers and only 5 tight ends who scored over 10 fantasy points on the week. I am beyond frustrated at this point, and I'm sure you are too. Now, in today's show, we're going through the typical topics. We'll talk about the top injuries from week 11. You better believe I'm going to rage a little bit. We'll discuss the bye weeks that are upcoming in week 12, the best available players on the waiver wire, some waiver wire power rankings, starter stash, FAAB budget recommendations, and some Streamin Ds. Now, there are timestamps to all those different sections down below in the description, and if you enjoy that, please do me a favor and hit the like button if you haven't already. But okay, it's Monday morning, and as frustrating as fantasy is, at least we bounced back once again with our underdog pick'ems in week 11. Last week, we hit 6 of the 8 picks that I posted in my video from Friday. Now, if you want to play along with us, all you got to do is sign up on Underdog right now. Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app, create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then, make your initial minimum deposit and come play a contest with us. Once you play a $5 contest, they're going to put $100 in bonus funds directly into your account. You can then take that $100 in bonus funds and play along with us on house money for weeks. Play 5, get 100. It's an absolute no-brainer. Now, links are down below in the description of this video, but now let's go ahead and dive into week 12 and first discuss some of the major injuries we saw in week 11. And of course, since 2025 absolutely hates us, we once again have a laundry list of injuries. At the top of the list, it's Josh Jacobs, who suffered a knee injury, a potential knee sprain. He could be out until after Thanksgiving. Typically, depending on the severity of an injury like this, we could be looking at 1 to 6 weeks. Great. How about Drake London, another stud here in fantasy football, suffered a similar injury to his knee. The exact same outcome. We could be without Drake until after Thanksgiving. He's already been ruled out in week 12, and that is never a good sign. How about Aaron Rodgers, quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, suffered a wrist injury. They're saying it is a quote-unquote small wrist fracture. We're really awaiting word whether or not he needs surgery or not. That could be worst case scenario. How about Michael Penix? He could be done for the year with a knee injury. Looks like we're going to get Kirk Cousins back. Yay, said everyone. How about Dylan Gabriel? He suffered a concussion. He could miss week 12. We could be looking at a Shedeur Sanders start. Calvin Ridley, he fractured his fibula. His season is over. Did it ever begin? Is a question we should probably be asking a little bit. How about Devon Achane? He suffered an injury to his back. However, he returned to the game. It is not uncommon for back injuries to get worse after the game. But good news, they're on the bye this week, so he should be good to go once he returns. And then Jaylen Warren, running back of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he suffered an ankle injury as well. He returned to the game, but you could tell he was not 100%. Hopefully it's not something that gets worse throughout the week, and then we have him here in week 12, another guy we need to pay attention to in the practice reports here in week 12. Now, before we go any further though, it's time to rage. So Taylor, cue the music and the slow zoom. Because together, as a community, can we just admit that the NFL has completely lost its ever-loving mind this year? Nothing makes sense anymore. Every can't-miss player suddenly turns into a ghost the second you start them. Guys who had 30 points last week, now they've got 2 catches for 19 yards and a pulled hammy. It's like the league is being run by a fantasy troll at this point. Half of the league is on IR, the other half should be, and somehow the damn Jaguars just drug their nuts across the Chargers' chin and beat them by almost 30. I'm out there watching the Panthers score 30 points, where the Bears can't do crap despite having more weapons than the local pawn shop. What planet are we living on? I mean, one week your team is unstoppable. The next week they look like they've seen a football for the first time in history. Every Sunday feels like a group project where no one read the instructions. And don't get me started on the studs. Jamar Chase, he went missing in week 11. Cortland Sutton, he's in witness protection. And yet some dude named Terrell Shavers is putting up 17 fantasy points last week. I'm convinced that NFL logic here in 2025 is just injure everyone, confuse everyone, and make sure every fantasy manager questions their life choices by 4:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Fantasy managers are out here lighting sage like it's a spiritual battle. Start and sit decisions, they don't matter. You start a guy, he gets 3 points. You bench him, he scores 34 and gets a contract extension. I'm convinced every fantasy player comes with an inverted performance clause just to ruin our lives. Honestly, at this point, flip a coin. Light a candle. Start your kicker at the flex spot. Nothing matters. The NFL's drunk, and we're all just trying to survive at this point. So here we are, week 12, trying to make sense of a league that clearly has no interest in logic. But don't worry, I'll be right here, researching more than I ever did in high school, because we are all trapped in this toxic relationship together. I ain't gonna lie, it's always fun to rate. I wish I could just make rage videos and not even talk about football sometimes, but I know I don't have that luxury, so let's talk about the teams who are on bye here in week 12. We have 4 of them. The first one, the Denver Broncos, so no Bo Nix, RJ Harvey, Cortland Sutton, or Troy Franklin for your fantasy teams. The Miami Dolphins are on a bye as well. No Tua Tagovailoa, Devon Achane, or Jalen Waddle this week. Then we also have the Los Angeles Chargers, no Justin Herbert, Kamani Vidal, Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, or Oronde Gadsden. And then lastly, the Washington Commandos as well, so no Deebo Samuel, no Zach Ertz. Not a ton of high-end fantasy options, but really, given the landscape currently of this game, we're going to be missing some of these guys for sure this week. So what can we do? Do we have some must-add players? I would love to sit here and lie to you and be like, yes, we are in good shape, but we are not. We are at the bottom of the barrel right now. There is no one that I see on the waiver wire anywhere that I can look at and be like, you know what? This could help carry a team over the next couple weeks. But we do have a couple options that we need to pay attention to, so be sure to hang in there with me once we get to them. We'll start off at the quarterback position in case you need to stream this week. Not a lot of great options. We'll start off with Trevor Lawrence. He's 30% owned. He's going up against Arizona. He hasn't really been killing it through the air this year. He's had only 160 yards passing and a touchdown now in back-to-back games. What's been saving him is his rushing production. He has 3 rushing touchdowns over his last 3 games, and Arizona has allowed 20-plus yards rushing to 5 different quarterbacks this season. Then we get down to Bryce Young, who's 12% owned going up against San Francisco, and we just do not know which Bryce Young is going to show up. The guy who's going to come out and throw for barely 100 yards and no touchdowns, or the guy who's going to come out and set franchise records with 448 yards passing and 3 touchdowns and revert to what he was at Alabama. This is a great matchup for him this week, though, going up against San Francisco, whose secondary is just beat up and just got destroyed by Jacoby Brissett, who is actually next on the list because he's still only 28% owned, and I don't really understand why that ownership percentage is so low, because every week I know we're all expecting for the wheels just to fall off, and then he goes out and plays great. He just set an NFL record for 47 completions in 1 game and is now thrown for multiple touchdowns in 5 straight games, and he did it last week without his number 1 wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. Now he gets a matchup going up against Jacksonville, and they allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. All right, now let's go down to running backs. Kenneth Gainwell first. He's 38% owned going up against Chicago. He played pretty good here in week 11. He got a bigger opportunity, though, due to an injury to Jalen Warren. Now, Warren has already come out and said he's going to be good to go there in week 12, but if there are any limitations, that means more volume going the way of Kenneth Gainwell. He isn't a guy that I want to pick up and just start right away. We need to find out what's going on rest of the week with Jalen Warren first, but he does have a decent matchup this week going up against Chicago. How about Emmanuel Wilson in Green Bay? Only 6% owned going up against Minnesota, and with the injury to Josh Jacobs, Wilson will be the next man up. He's averaging over 4 yards per carry on the season. He's a capable pass catcher, and if Jacobs ends up missing multiple weeks, which it sounds like he will, Emmanuel Wilson could be a startable option for your fantasy team. Now, after him, we got Devin Singletary of the New York Giants. He's 25% owned going up against Detroit, and it's really hard to trust the New York backfield because Singletary and Tracy are basically splitting touches 50-50. The matchup, it won't be easy this week for them either going up against Detroit, but Singletary has had 10-plus touches now in 3 straight games, and if you're desperate for a running back, at least he's touching the football. Now, after him, we got Sean Tucker of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's 25% 55% owned, and a lot of people have a lot of interest in Sean Tucker. Tucker getting a larger role and outproducing Rachaad White isn't really a surprise. 141 yards and 3 touchdowns is a surprise. But really the biggest issue we have here is, when does Bucky Irving return? No one really seems to know anything. But what we do know is, when Bucky returns, if he's fully healthy, this is still going to be his backfield. But there is a little bit of a silver lining with the way that Sean Tucker has played here as of late. Maybe it gives Tampa Bay the luxury to not rush Bucky back to full snaps once he does return. Now, I know that sucks for all of us Bucky owners in fantasy football, but if you're desperate for a running back, Sean Tucker may not do what he just did, but could have a decent role over the next few weeks. I do know that we cannot count on what we just saw from him last week every week going forward, though. That is not realistic. How about Keaton Mitchell next to the Baltimore Ravens? He's only 2% owned going up against the Jets. He continues to look like a damn firecracker every time he gets the ball in his hands. The problem is, he doesn't get the ball in his hands very often. They do have a good upcoming schedule, though, do the Baltimore Ravens, with a matchup against the Jets and 2 against the Cincinnati Bengals. With matchups like that upcoming, he could see some decent work in the next few weeks. We also have Chris Rodriguez in Washington. He's 14% owned, and actually he's going on the bye as of right now. But finally, we found someone that can run the ball successfully in Washington. JCM, Bill, whatever you want to call him, has struggled, and Rodriguez is coming off a season-high 16 touches and 85 total yards. Like I mentioned, though, he's on the bye this week. He cannot help your fantasy team. But in sheer desperation mode, pick him up a week early. Stash him, because he should have a role once they do return, and maybe you can get him a little bit cheaper here this week. Since they can't help a lot of other teams, they'll probably bypass him altogether. But now let's move down to the wide receiver position. First up, Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals going up against Jacksonville. He exploded for 15 catches and 185 yards in week 11, but what's irritating is that the Arizona Cardinals have a wide receiver of that caliber, yet he's only gone over 50 yards in a game 2 times all year long. Why is he not a bigger part of this offense? People are going to be flying to the waiver wire to pick up Michael Wilson, but don't forget, part of the reason he saw all that usage last week was because Marvin Harrison Jr. was not playing. Now, once Marv returns, you gotta think that the targets will go back his way and to Trey McBride. You also have to realize that Jacoby Brissett isn't going to complete 47 passes a game going forward. It was a great game for Michael Wilson, don't get me wrong, but don't go out there and overpay and expect anything close to that in the upcoming weeks. How about Mac Hollins of the New England Patriots? He's going up against Cincinnati, and he has had at least 8 fantasy points now in 3 of his last 4 games played. He's really turned into their deep ball guy in this offense, and he's finding himself making some big plays each and every game. Now he gets a matchup going up against Cincinnati, which is great. How about Jaden Reed in Green Bay? He's 40% owned, and his return from the IR is nearing. With the injuries to Josh Jacobs, we know that Matthew Golden and Romeo Doubs also banged up, and Christian Watson is just an injury waiting to happen. We could see Jaden Reed with an immediate role once he does return. If you can stash him, you might want to. We also have Alec Pierce coming off the bye week, 48% owned, going up against Kansas City. We've been talking about him in this show for over a month now, yet he is still under 50% owned. He may be out there, especially since he is coming off the bye. A lot of people may have forgotten about him, but he's had 10 plus fantasy points now in 3 of his last 4 games played, and has had a catch of at least 30 yards or more in 4 straight ball games. Then we get down to Darnell Mooney, who I see a lot of people talking about as of right now. He's 35% owned going up against New Orleans. And obviously, with the injury to Drake London, more volume has to go the way of Darnell Mooney. But we also had an injury to Michael Penix, which means we now get back the immobile Kirk Cousins. Now, I understand that I'm not a defensive coordinator in the NFL, but if I was, in a situation like this, I would be selling out to stop the run, trying to limit Bijan Robinson and put pressure on Kirk Cousins, because I know he can't beat me down the field with the minimal weapons that he has. Darnell Mooney has always kind of been more of a deep ball type of guy, and Kirk Cousins isn't going to have that type of time in the pocket. If you're looking for immediate help, his target share is about to increase, and maybe you take a stab on him. But am I starting him with a warm, fuzzy feeling on the inside? No. Absolutely not. Now, what does give me a warm fuzzy is all the tight ends that we have available still on the waiver wire. Juwan Johnson in New Orleans, he's coming off the bye week. He's 40% owned going up against the Atlanta Falcons. He's had touchdowns in back-to-back games, and don't forget, since New Orleans traded away Rashid Shaheed, Juwan Johnson is the number 2 target in this offense. Dalton Schultz is still sitting out there, another guy we have talked about on this show forever, however, still shows less than 50% owned. He's been one of the most consistent tight ends over the last 6 weeks of the NFL season. This week, though, is a very tough matchup going up against Buffalo. No team in the NFL allows fewer fantasy points per game to the tight end position than the Buffalo Bills. Then we have Cade Otton going up against the Rams. He's 50% owned. Not a great week last week for Cade Otton, but who did he play? Yes, the Buffalo Bills, who we just said really can limit the tight end position. Now he gets a much better matchup this week going up against the Rams. He doesn't have to worry about the weather and should continue to see decent targets in this Tampa Bay offense. And then lastly, if you're desperate, Chig Okonkwo of the Tennessee Titans. He's only 10% owned. We know that Calvin Ridley is now out for the season. Chimere Dike is hurt. Alec Eomanor hasn't been 100% healthy for a couple of weeks. And then we add in the fact that they have a matchup going up against Seattle, who allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. That makes Chig Okonkwo a streaming option here in week 12. But now that we've gone through those names, how do we rank them? Who are the most important guys to grab off the waiver wire now? Just like I normally do, quarterbacks and tight ends are at the bottom of this list. This does not mean they have the least amount of value. I've ranked them by their position. If that is a position of need for you, most people are looking for running backs and wide receivers, so that's why they're at the top of the list. And at the top of this list, I went back-to-back running back with Emmanuel Wilson and Sean Tucker. We know that Josh Jacobs is going to miss multiple weeks. We do not know when Bucky Irving is going to return. That's why I have Wilson at 1, Tucker at 2. Then we have Alec Pierce, followed by Jaden Reed and Mac Hollins. Then we go down to Chris Rodriguez in Washington, followed by Kenneth Gainwell and Keaton Mitchell. Then we go back to the wide receiver position at Michael Wilson and Darnell Mooney, followed by Devin Singletary there to round out the running backs and wide receivers. When we get down to the quarterbacks, I'm putting them in this order: Jacoby Brissett, Bryce Young, and then Trevor Lawrence. If you're looking for a tight end, we're going Juwan Johnson, Dalton Schultz, Cade Otton, and then Chig Okonkwo. Now, obviously, when you pick up guys off the waiver wire, you don't want to throw them directly into your lineup sometimes. So who would we start? Who would we stash? Well, right here at the top, Emmanuel Wilson, Sean Tucker, Alec Pierce. At this point, their starts here for the week if you can grab them off the waiver wire. Jaden Reed, obviously, he's still a stash. We don't know exactly when he's going to be back. Mac Hollins could be a start for you. Chris Rodriguez is on a bye, so please do not start him. Kenneth Gainwell, a little bit more of a stash unless news comes out that Jaylen Warren will have any type of limitations. Keaton Mitchell, a little bit more of a stash as well. Michael Wilson, I have listed as a start. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. should be back this week, but if he has any limitations, obviously, we go back to Michael Wilson with what we just saw last week. Darnell Mooney, if you're desperate for a wide receiver, you can start him. Am I anxious to start him? Am I looking forward to starting him with Kirk Cousins? If I'm being completely honest, no, but the matchup isn't horrible. Devin Singletary, prefer to stash if at all possible. Now, obviously, we're recommending tight ends and quarterbacks. They're all streamable options. They'll all be starts. Now, if you're wondering how much you need to spend on these guys, we've got some FAAB budget recommendations here as well. Emmanuel Wilson, Sean Tucker, Alec Pierce, the best available options in my opinion. I'll go up to 30% of your FAAB budget. After that, though, it's a pretty steep decrease. Reed, Hollins, Rodriguez, Gainwell, Mitchell, Wilson, Mooney, Singletary, up to 15% or so. A lot of questions surrounding these guys. A lot of guys that may not have rest of season value. I guess you could look at Jaden Reed as potentially being the next best option, but we really don't even know for sure when he's going to be back. That's why I don't want to overspend on him either. It's not like we haven't been surprised this season by players staying out longer than expected. Bucky Irving. After that, though, we go down to the quarterbacks and tight ends. Typically, I like to stay right around 10% for a streaming option. If you're desperate for a quarterback, though, at this point, Jacoby Brissett seems like he's going to have rest of season value. Now, if you find yourself needing a Streamin D this week, good. luck. There's probably not a lot of great options out there on the waiver wire. I included the Ravens. They may not even be available in your league, but if they are, scoop them up this week going up against the Jets. The Ravens have scored 8+ fantasy points now in 3 straight games, and they have minimal weapons to contain on the Jets' offensive side of the football. Then we have the Raiders going up against Cleveland. With the Dylan Gabriel concussion, we could be looking at a Shedeur Sanders start, and with the pass rush that he may see, it could lead to some turnovers there for the Vegas Raiders. And then lastly, the Saints going up against Atlanta. We know Atlanta's not going to have Michael Penix. They're not going to have Drake London. But what they will have is an immobile Kirk Cousins and not a lot of other options outside of Bijan Robinson. That should make it easier for the Saints to just try to take away the run, put pressure on Kirk Cousins, and force mistakes down the field. But all right, there you have your Week 12 waiver wire show. Obviously, we're getting to that point of the season where there's not a lot of great options out there. We've been playing backups for weeks, so it's not like we're looking for handcuffs because the handcuffs have already been on our roster probably since October. The 2025 NFL season is like survival of the fittest. Who can adapt? Who can overcome the quickest? But most importantly, don't forget this. Even if you're out of the playoff hunt at this time, there is nothing wrong, and it's actually enjoyable to play the spoiler and try to keep one of your friends out of the playoffs. So don't go out there and just give up. Go out there and play spoiler.